Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Thursday, August 1st, 2013. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Couple of programming notes. Our third hour guest today is Adele Weiss from WeissParis.com, and this is an organization that basically helps you look for places where the government, specifically taxation and jurisdiction, is not following the letter of the law. And we have learned, to our chagrin, over the last several months, that corporations and government do not obey the law. They break it routinely, debt collection, all that kind of stuff. They'll flagrantly break the law and hope you don't know they're in violation, because there's no enforcement coming from within the system. And so in this day and age, you have to take responsibility for the people you're dealing with to make sure they are in compliance with those laws that still exist to protect ordinary American citizens. You have to do it. Nobody's going to do it for you. The government is clearly on the side of the corporations right now, side of the money junkies. They're going to break the law left and right and figure you're not going to do anything about it. Well, here's one way that you're going to be able to do something about that, and that'll be in our third hour. We finally nailed down Ben Swan in the schedule. He is going to be joining us on August 13th in our third hour. Of course, we all know Ben Swan and all the amazing work he was doing at Fox 19 in Cincinnati, and now he's broken away from the belly of the beast, and now he's mounting his own independent media organization. He's going to be joining us to talk about that. And, of course, tomorrow, Friday, Claire will be joining us in the third hour to talk about her unique perspective on things. Now, today, speaking of the corporate media has been conditizing us again. Looking at Fox News, it has been all Ariel Castro all morning long, and I think they're using that because they like being able to bash the name Castro. Ooh, Castro, bad guy. Kind of an underhanded way of digging at Cuba. And I'm not saying that what this man did was not horrific. It really was, and he deserves to go away. But it's not the only thing going on. Apparently, they just finished sentencing him. Life sentence plus 1,000 years, but with time off for good behavior, he'll be out in 200 or 300 years. So that's all that we need to talk about that story. Over at the White House, the official spokesslug, Jay Carney, is out there again pushing that idea that all these scandals that are out there, they're just phony. They're distractions. They're just trying to take the focus off of Obama's promise that he is going to fudge the economic data to make you think the economy is doing much, much better. And apparently Jay was specifically asked, which scandals are the phony ones, and he replied, the IRS targeting of political dissidents, and of course Benghazi, meaning these are the most dangerous and damaging threats to Obama, so we should pay more attention to them. Now, speaking of scandals, obviously one of them is NSA Gate, and yesterday evening I issued my third challenge to the National Security Agency and also to the Black Hats, who are having their convention in Las Vegas right now. And according to the server logs, a lot of people are already downloading my latest encrypted message. I am hurling the defy once more at the NSA. Now, in the earlier challenges, I got a lot of emails saying, if they really wanted to, they could break your encryption, they could brute force your keys and everything. My contention is that when you're decoding an unknown message, there are two steps. Finding the method, then finding the key. And of the two, the first one is the hard part. And so on this challenge, I included the key. You've got the encrypted message and the image file I used as the encryption key. So I'm sort of giving away the secret here in terms of the encryption key. But if my theory is correct, the message will remain protected because the encryption method is not one of these mandated standard forms of encryption that we've all been slowly massaged into using and exist for no other reason than to make sure the NSA, with their automated massive computer systems, can keep watch on what we, the American people, are doing. And so the whole point of this exercise, in which I actually provided the encryption-decryption key, is to underscore that if a real criminal or a real terrorist invests the time to come up with their own encryption method, they're going to be safe from NSA spying. The NSA will know there's an encrypted message, unless it's buried using steganography, which can be done, in which case they won't even know they're looking at a message. You know, go to a porn website, you're looking at all the naked girls and don't realize all those images contain secret coded messages inside because they're too busy drooling on their keyboards here. So basically, this is my third challenge. We have a free What Really Happened coffee mug to the first crypto expert that succeeds in breaking that original message content. And this mug is a custom design. It will actually say winner of the What Really Happened NSA challenge to the first person who comes up with the code. If nobody breaks the message, then on my birthday, end of this month, August 29th, same birthday as Michael Jackson, which blows the theory of astrology out the water, I will release the encryption code, how I did it, the original clear message, so you can play with it. These are not strong encryption systems. They're designed to basically not be breakable by the standard methods the NSA is using. And the whole point of this exercise, of this NSA challenge, is to remind people the first step towards doing something is knowing it can be done. And if I can thwart the NSA's cryptographers with my limited skills and knowledge, then it means other Americans who need to protect their business secrets from being pilfered by intelligence agencies for their own profit are going to be able to do exactly the same. Now, the NSA has this image promoted in the media of being able to read everything, see everything, decode everything. The cybernetic version of James Bond. But really, if you think about what they're doing and how they're doing it, and how this system really is just looking at law-abiding citizens, they're really down on the same level as street cops, where they are unable to catch 95% of the real criminals, 100% of the Wall Street crooks, and they're there to just hand out traffic citations to Americans who stupidly run a red light in front of them. And that is really it. Now, a lot of people are starting to ask, this was over at 1800politics.com, does the NSA actually read what it's grabbing? And the answer is no, they don't have the manpower to do it. They're scanning for keywords that will flag somebody as suspicious. And we got this story out of the Organic Prepper up in Canada, how this family had Googled the words backpacks and pressure cookers, not at the same time, and law enforcement showed up to make sure they weren't building something bad. Now, going from that list of keywords being scanned for by the Department of Homeland Security and the NSA, it is very easy to use those words in benign contexts. Will colloidal silver protect me from anthrax, for example? Where can I buy organic fertilizer for my tomatoes? And yet, keying in on those words, fertilizer and anthrax, you're going to get a false positive that this is a person you should be looking at. Remember that story about these people who had an indoor vegetable garden in their basement, non-GMO food, and they were growing it indoors to have it there through the winter. And because they had bought so many Growlux bulbs at their local home and garden store, the computer spat it out, oh, they've got to be drug dealers. And their door got kicked down and they got a paramilitary-style raid into their homes. And they weren't growing drugs. And you would have thought at least somebody might knock on the door and say, I have a warrant to examine the location where you have these Growlux bulbs. But no, we're going to send in the guys with the machine guns and the Nomex and the big armored vehicles to prove that we really needed to spend all that money on it. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And speaking of the black hats, the computer security experts, and there's also a bunch of them who are actual computer criminals who pretend to be security experts to go to the convention and get the latest goodies to inflict on the rest of the world. apparently there was a bit of an altercation when the director of national security was up there making the keynote speech, and he got heckled from the audience. And he's out there saying, "We found all these terrorists out there," which we know the NSA is taking credit for terror arrests that were accomplished with ordinary police work. And they won't talk about the others. Oh, it's national security. Just take our word for it. We got these bad guys by spying on everybody. Well, no, we're not going to take your word about anything at this point. The credibility of the entire federal government is zero. If we were allowed to have negative numbers, it'd be lower. But apparently profanities were shouted at him from the audience in the spirit of the First Amendment right. And basically, the tone of the audience is the same that I just said. We don't trust you. We do not trust the government. Why? Because it is the government. Alexander's up there saying that he hadn't lied to Congress, and yet at this particular point, it's pretty obvious they did. These intelligence agencies are engaged in illegal and unconstitutional behavior. Do you really think they're going to go before Congress and say, "Ha, you caught us. Yeah, we're breaking the Constitution. We're completely illegal. Go ahead, cut our funding"? Not going to happen. Latest story coming from Glenn Greenwald is that, yeah, the NSA is lying about what can be done because Edward Snowden confirmed in some of the documents he released through Glenn Greenwald, yes, anybody sitting at the NSA could type into their computer and read people's emails. So yeah, they're lying about it. And they're getting away with it. I mean, for any other American, if you were lying before Congress or lying before a court of law, you go to jail for that. Nobody's going to touch the NSA. The sort of people who are attracted to government and politics, they all have skeletons in their closet. And the NSA is busy digging them out to protect itself, to ensure its grip on America's domestic policy and foreign policy. We know that because J. Edgar Hoover did that. That's how he wound up being FBI director for life. He had his private secret files that had all the sex scandals and other problems on America's top politicians. He even blackmailed President John F. Kennedy. Going back to the NSA's own leaked slideshows on how they're gathering all this intelligence on Americans, and there's a graphic in there about the typical user on HTTP. And that's nonsense. Do you really think real criminals and terrorists are using HTTP? If they're not on HumanNet, they're on virtual private networks. They're using packet technology that is not used by ordinary consumers to avoid that. And the bottom line is, for all this claim that spying on ordinary Americans is somehow going to defeat terror, and the NSA challenges prove that is a lie, the fact is that the NSA, even though the FBI admitted having tapped their phones, were not able to predict what the Tsarnaev brothers are alleged to have done. They didn't catch the underwear bomber. Of course, he was escorted on the plane around security, according to a witness, the Times Square bomber. Now, either all of these bombings are staged false flag events to scare us back into running to Big Daddy government, save us from the mean old terrorists, or the NSA is completely incompetent. Like I said, the NSA has this image sold to you by TV and film of being this high-tech James Bond gang going after the top terrorists. Just like the police have this media-fed image of always getting the murderers, rapists, and muggers. But we know the police rarely catch real criminals. If you go to a part of the town you live in that you don't normally hang out in and nobody knows you, and you rob a convenience store, there is a 1 in 33 chance you'll ever get arrested. That's the reality here. And if you're on Wall Street, there's zero chance you're ever going to be arrested. The police are just out there writing traffic tickets to people who are dumb enough to run a red light in front of a police car. And the NSA is hoping that law-abiding American citizens will Google about backpacks and pressure cookers to justify an armed raid into their home to prove how butch they all are. Now, getting over to Edward Snowden, he has been granted a temporary asylum in Russia for 1 year's time. He has left the Moscow airport and is probably ensconced in a brand new apartment, and he's already, I'm sure, being approached by all Russian computer security companies and government agencies to share what he knows. And the U.S. is throwing a tantrum. How dare you? How dare you? How dare you? And global opinion is that what Snowden did was absolutely heroic. He did not give military secrets to a sworn enemy. He blew the whistle on the government's unconstitutional behavior to you, the American people. And if you will remember, a couple of weeks ago, I predicted Russia would eventually grant him asylum. You know why? Because as soon as the Obama administration started their give him to us or else bullying, they created a political situation in which it was impossible for Russia to send Snowden home without looking like they were bowing and obeying Washington, D.C., and that was never going to happen. So by trying this bluff and bluster, give him to us or else, the Obama administration created that political situation where Russia was going to grant Snowden asylum to prove to the world they don't bow and scrape to Washington, D.C. I got to tell you, the more I study the White House, the more obvious it is Obama is getting very bad advice from his advisors. Probably because he's now surrounded by a bunch of highly paid yes men and yes women who are not going to tell the president what he really needs to know. They're telling him what he wants to hear, or what they think he wants to hear, to protect their phony baloney high-paying jobs. The best place for Obama to be getting advice and information are for people he's not actually paying any money to, where they can tell him the truth about what's going on. And if he doesn't like it, fine, sorry to waste your time. One of Obama's advisors is a failed novelist who tried to sell a novel about an attack on an American consulate triggered by an anti-Muslim film. That's where they got the script for Benghazi. And that's why Jay Carney is out there saying, oh, Benghazi's the biggest of the phony distractions. That's the one they're most afraid of. And they have a right to be, because all these other government agencies would love to put the focus back on Benghazi, because that harms Obama himself only. Doesn't delegitimize the entire federal government the way the IRS and DOJ and EPA scandals do. So they're trying to, it's the blame-shifting regatta is well and truly underway. Speaking of the Internal Revenue Service, apparently emails have surfaced showing collusion between the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Elections Commission, colluding against conservative groups and GOP candidates and sponsors. This is a flat-out violation of the law. The IRS is not allowed to release anybody's tax records to anybody outside the IRS itself, unless there is an ongoing criminal investigation with the appropriate warrant signed by a judge. This is going back to Lois Lerner, who's already had to step down. And this kind of collusion, this is going to ramp this scandal up even higher than it was before. Going to take a break for commercials. We will be. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this story. It was broken by the National Review Online of emails that have surfaced showing collusion between the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Elections Commission. Colluding with regard to at least one conservative group trying to apply for tax-exempt status. And so as a result, House Ways and Means Committee Chairman David Camp and Oversight Subcommittee Chairman Charles Boustany, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, are calling on the Internal Revenue Service to release all their communications between the IRS and the FEC from 2008 to 2012. Now, the government is supposed to be impartial to the political process. We have a bipartisan two-party system which was set up in order to hold down the costs of bribing multiple candidates from multiple parties to lower the cost of bribery for the corporations. It's not the way the United States was set up. The United States was not set up with a two-party system. There could be as many parties as you would want. But from the point of view of the money junkies, if there's only two accepted parties, then we only have to bribe two candidates to bypass the will of the people the next election. Now, the government itself is not supposed to be engaging in partisan activity, and here we have them doing, and it is a reminder that whereas the original United States of America was a nation ruled by law that applied to everybody because all people were presumed equal, we now have a society where the laws are only intended for you, the ordinary American serf, and corporations and governments just feel that they can do whatever they feel they need to do for whatever motive they want to do. We're going to go to the phones here. Jim in South Carolina. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Michael. This is about Snowden there and the NSA.
Yes.
That whole spy scandal goes much deeper than just domestic spying. That goes to the seat of every government in Europe.
Oh, it is. It's a global network. It's a global network. There's no doubt about that. All of this goes back to the original Echelon program in the 1980s, where we had these five nations cooperating.
This is even bigger than Echelon. This goes to the global net, as you just said. It goes to Asia, China. They're all getting off the net. They're all dumping U.S. companies because of the cloud. You said it was nothing but a giant computer, and everything else is going to be just a server. They're dumping companies from Silicon Valley. They're dumping everything that has to do with the United States, and they're doing it right now.
They absolutely are. The Snowden revelations have already triggered people canceling online social media accounts. Companies are moving away from the cloud. Again, going back to the Seattle APEC conference, in which U.S. intelligence agencies were stealing business secrets from conference attendees to give to cronies. We know this government cannot be trusted with our data, and they're in everywhere watching ordinary law-abiding citizens. They're unable to actually go after real criminals and terrorists who can secure their communications. And it is a huge, huge problem. It's already hitting the bottom line on companies like Facebook. All of the American cloud server vendors are seeing contracts canceled from over there in Europe. People are taking back control of their own personal data. They're taking it offline, unpluggable hard drives, and it's a huge, huge problem for the United States, not just in terms of revenues into these computer companies. It is a huge problem politically because the United States has justified its dominion over the rest of the world for being the champion of human rights. And now the United States stands exposed as one of the greatest tyrannies in all of history.
Systems, they're huge in defense. They went off the cloud. They're gone. They don't want any more to do with NSA spying anywhere.
You know, the Russian security services have dumped computers completely. They're going back to manual typewriters for their sensitive documents. You know, everybody's unplugging from this stuff. No, I don't blame them at all. I don't blame them at all. I miss my little Swintech I used to have here.
Better find it. It's going to become popular again.
Yeah, old-fashioned man. Well, there was this movie, Mercury Rising, Bruce Willis movie. And
I've seen that.
That's a
great movie.
And there are these two people inside the NSA who want to blow the whistle on some the assassination of some parents of this autistic child who's able to just somehow read the NSA's top code. And the whistleblowers are afraid to type anything on their computers at work, so they're at a little sort of a flea market, and they find a manual typewriter, and the girl says low-tech rules. And that's what they proceed to do, is type up a regular paper letter, which they're going to mail, but the NSA gets to them and kills them first. And, yeah, people are pulling away from all of these things. I know a lot more people are starting to get these special cases that will shield your cell phone and your credit cards from electronic scanning. People are starting to dig out those old laptops that didn't have Wi-Fi built in and starting to put their private stuff there. And because of this NSA challenge, and because I'm just giving the code away, a lot of people are just going to start protecting their private data. And that is going to increase the NSA's workload trying to read all of this traffic. Because they're not going to know if this encrypted little message here is a plan to, nuke something, or it's grandmother's top secret chocolate chip cookie recipe. And so they're very, very unhappy about this.
You know, you go out and you buy a bag of Fritos or potato chips in the Mylar bag with the aluminum foil lining. Makes a wonderful bag to put all your electronics in, like your Easy Fleece card for your car, your credit cards, your wallet for anything with an RFID chip in it. Will block it.
Well, RFID chips are very, very low power, and the Mylar bag may work for them, but for cell phones and other things, I think you need a little more. Somebody sent me an email saying that 4 layers of aluminum foil will do it, but ultimately, of course, we had this guest on a show who's trying to launch a company called PrivacyCase.com, and they make a very rugged, sturdy cell phone case, and they sent me one as a demo, and I did try it out, and it absolutely does cut the cell phone out of the cellular network and the GPS network for those rare occasions where I might want to go someplace where I don't want anybody to know I'm going there.
Well, if I go somewhere I don't want anybody to know where I'm going, I leave my cell phone at home.
Well, you know, another good thing to do is start, you know, swapping cell phones every once in a while with a friend or your family in order to make the data completely unreliable. Same thing that we do when we say take some of these buzzwords from the monitoring list and include them in your email signature, just so that the automatic flagging system is getting all these false positives. And I don't feel anything wrong in doing this, because the government is wrong to be spying on law-abiding American citizens. That Constitution is the contract with America. It is the rules under which we, the people, allow the government to manage the nation. And if that government is not going to follow the rules, they're no longer a legitimate government. And we, the people, are justified in anything that we can do to gum the works up. Go back to Gandhi, where he said the key to bringing down this occupational government, in their case Britain, in our case the money junkies, is peaceful, nonviolent, non-cooperation. And non-cooperation means you don't get to look at our data anymore unless you have witnesses and evidence that we are engaged in an actual crime. It's none of your business. That's what that Fourth Amendment's all about. This government...
One other thing.
Yeah.
Yep. One other thing. I will bet you that Snowden steps on an Aeroflot flight within 8 months out of Russia and goes to an undisclosed location on this planet.
Absolutely. I wouldn't even give it 8 months. He may be gone 3 weeks from now.
But it's going to be on Aeroflot, and they dare not touch one of them airplanes.
Absolutely. They may put him on a military plane, because you don't want U.S. military firing on Russian military, because that's how Cold Wars get hot.
Well, I don't think they'll do a military, but they will definitely do an Aeroflot.
Well, they'll do something. I have absolutely no doubt. On the other hand, Russia's a cool place to live. It's got a happening economy. They took control of their central bank. Their economy is booming right now. You know, and they've got all these wonderful places like the museums, the Hermitage, you know, and all those other great historical sites there. They've got a booming film industry over there. Russia's a happening place compared to the United States right now.
And Siberia, when it's not freezing, is a beautiful part of the country. It's green and lush and got everything you can imagine. A
lot of good hunting up there, I understand. Not that I hunt anymore. I used to. I don't anymore. I do my hunting with a telephoto lens. But for those who want to go out and engage with nature, it's a great place to do it. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break. Jim, I got to let you go. We have another caller on the line that we will get to as soon as we come back from these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And got a message here saying common sense. We've become almost habitually driven to constantly have our smartphones with us at any and all times. You know, when I was a kid, the phones were wired to the wall, and if you were away from the phone, that was it. People would call back. Then you had messaging systems, which still exist. Maybe it's time for Americans to start thinking, at least on the weekends, put the phone down. If it's important, they'll call you back. Just put the phone in the drawer. Put it into airplane mode. Put it in the drawer. Go on out. Be free from that phone for a while. What a de-stressor that would be. You got to take a break away from it, whether it's your job or family calling. Just put the phone down on weekends. Go out. Get away from it. Give yourself a break. Now, on the assumption that the NSA or the FBI is listening to what I do through my phone, I put it on an AM radio tuned to one of the local religious stations all night long. Let them listen to that here. We're going to go back to the phones here. Mike in Kentucky. Aloha, Mike. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, take 14 years of people's phone audio coming to your fax machine, and I came up with that suggestion years ago of tuning a FM radio while you charge your phone at home off channel so they get nothing but white noise, so they don't hear your spouse's pet name for you during coitus. But I wrote a little parody here. Hush, big brother, don't say a word. Mama's going to let you track the towelhead herd. Just don't tell them I'm listening in, and we'll all pretend it's no sin. That's, Big Brother is springboarding off of and in bed with Ma Bell. Ma Bell and the various subcontractors and privatized total information awareness junk that's been going on. From my people I've talked with, they installed the equipment to do this stuff starting in the early 90s. I know an engineer that left his job at a cable TV company to go out west in the Four Corners area where hardly anybody lives to help the cell phone companies out there in 1992 get compliant to be able to track a phone down to less than 3 meters. That was the FCC mandate 20 years ago.
Yeah, they've been building this stuff in there for a long time. There was a big scandal some years back where somebody blew the whistle that there were these secret rooms in the AT&T switching centers.
That's just one little room, though. Little room. I'm talking to the guys I've been talking to installed entire floors of equipment, and there's so much heat generated to keep the air conditioning at 40 degrees. I mean, secret floors where you either have to get on a special elevator or you have to have a key in order to get the elevator to stop on that floor. Or ghost floors is what I call them, of equipment in major cities like Chicago.
Any major city at all to front end of this thing. And you know what it all comes down to? It comes down to the idea of respect. When two ordinary people respect each other, inevitably respect for their privacy comes into it. When you have a government that sees it as their inherent right, even though it is unconstitutional, to spy on everything you are doing in your daily life, that is the proof right there. Government does not respect the people. They do not see us. They do not see us as fellow human beings worthy or deserving of respect. They see us as property. They see us as livestock. They're treating us like a herd of animals. We're going to watch everything you do. We're going to tell you what food you're going to eat, what food you can't eat, what medications you're required to take, what medications you're not allowed to take on your own. We are being treated as a herd of animals to be harvested for wealth and future soldiers. This government does not respect the American people. At the same time, they demand the American people respect the government. And respect and trust has to be a two-way street. You can't just sit up there and say, you will trust and respect me, but I don't have to do it to you. No, that's not what the America is supposed to be. We're supposed to be a nation of laws that apply to everybody, most especially the government.
It seems to be more like biggest pirate wins here lately. In the last 20 years or so, the biggest pirate wins.
Well, but the good news is the American people and the people of the world now know what's been going on. The scales have fallen from their eyes. They've taken the red pill, to use the Matrix metaphor, and they're seeing that Matrix now, and they're very angry about it. And 300 million Americans taking steps to guarantee their own privacy is going to throw a major monkey wrench into this government's plan to watch everything that we do at all times and always.
There's still a lot. All right.
Yeah, there's a lot more there. Mike, we're going to let you go and switch over to Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Mike. I have to laugh because it takes me back to the 50s. I had 4 sisters and 4 brothers, and my mom would get into my sister's diary, my 2 sisters, and so they start writing it in Pig Latin. Or no, they started doing a shorthand first.
Yes.
And then my mom's a smart woman, so then they went to Big Latin in their diary, so Mom couldn't figure it out. So that just tickled hell out of me when you're talking about people reading your mail and your phone, That's something,
Well, I noticed down at one of the stores in our local mall that sort of sells esoteric things, statues and incense burners and stuff like that. And they sell a lot of cool swords and other stuff, which is why I go in there. But they're apparently doing a very brisk business in leather-bound paper diaries. that people can write in, and obviously there's no way for the NSA to hack into a diary that you're writing in and hiding between the mattresses on your bed. And I know many, many years ago, before I even embarked on this whole blogger, independent media thing, I tried keeping a diary on my computer, which was encrypted, but after a while it got to the point of saying, why should I leave this information around? I don't need to keep a diary. A lot of things I'd rather just as soon forget.
Mother's smart, and my mom never did figure it out, though, after a while, because my sisters were a little more educated. But I thought it was funny, and when you bring it up about them spying on things, I just thought that was...
Well, you know what's really weird here? When I was growing up, my parents didn't spy on me. You know, they had this idea that there is such a thing as personal space. Now, of course, today everybody's encouraged to spy on everybody. There was that scandal where the school district was issuing laptops with built-in cameras and using special software to spy on the kids in their bedroom, presumably in various states of undress, and doing the kind of private things kids do in their bedroom when they think they're alone. And I think that's absolutely appalling. You know, kids need privacy, adults need privacy. And that's really what that Fourth Amendment is all about, that recognition that if you are a human being with inherent rights, one of those rights is a right to privacy. That when you're in your home whipping up a batch of your grandmother's top secret chocolate chip cookies, that nobody has a right to peek in and find out what the secret ingredient is, as long as that secret ingredient isn't illegal. And that's really what it comes down to. Does the government respect the American people? Obviously not. Between the spying, the massive election fraud, the constant propaganda, this government has completely gone over to the dark side. It has delegitimized itself with these blatant violations of the Constitution. And I think that's what America is waking up to realize right now. We don't have a legal, legitimate federal government any longer. We can't. They're not playing by the rules. They're openly talking about tearing up the rules. And they're not allowed to do that. If they shred that Constitution, they're shredding their own authority, because the authority of the federal government rests on and is constrained by that Constitution. If they throw it out, they're totally illegal and illegitimate at that point.
Yes, it's getting like a communist state. You got to watch what you say and who you say it to. So
it's not just a communist state; it's a tyranny. Period. We don't need to link it to a particular ism. Fascists were doing the same thing. Socialists are doing the same thing. Churches are doing the same thing. It's all about somebody who feels they have to be in control, and that control includes keeping a watch on everything that everybody is doing, even though the current NSA system can't find real criminals, can't find the Wall Street insider traders, can't find anybody developing their own encryption. They're here to watch you, to make sure you're going to behave, which is a good reason to stop behaving at this point. All righty, let's see. Jim, going to let you go. We got to take a break for news and station identification. We have another caller waiting on the line we're going to get to as soon as we're back from the break. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. Chris in Las Vegas. Thank you for waiting. Chris, what's on your mind today?
Aloha, Michael.
Aloha, Nui Nui.
I was listening to your bard, Jim, and his little Tomia before, and his reference to ghost floors stimulated my memories. I'm a politically assassinated former union electrician in the Las Vegas area, and I recall many government buildings and hotels and other like institutions that had what were termed interstitial floors that I think precisely relate to Jim's observation of ghost floors.
Mm-hmm.
And it occurs to me they were there for a precise reason, but at the time I could not contemplate what that reason was and had no idea of the insidious nature of the utilization of these floors.
Well,
and being... Go ahead.
Yeah, the idea of a ghost floor, and for a while they had them in the World Trade Towers just before 9/11. These were floors that were simply locked out of the elevators, and you could not get on them. The workers who were doing that, what is called a renovation to the World Trade Towers, literally had an elevator set aside for their use that simply went between the loading dock and the floors where they were working. and whether or not they go to the extent of actually having the elevators pretend those floors aren't there or not, nobody really knows. But obviously there are large portions of these buildings, these telephone switching centers, computer centers, that are walled off from the public because there's some very nefarious activity going on in there. They've been building this stuff for decades now, at a time when we can't find funding for our schools, our roads, our bridges, a reviving of U.S. manufacturing. Talk about misspending the American people's money, because it is our money. And the government is supposed to take Americans' tax money and spend it on America and Americans, and here they're usurping our wealth in order to build a stronger cage around us, a cage that really isn't going to be all that effective anyway for reasons we've demonstrated.
One more small thing, if you don't mind, Michael.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here in Salt Lake City near Bluffdale, Utah, the home of the Metatron's Meta Data Center, that monster data center of every intel on Earth, right coincidentally across the highway, Redwood Road, from Fort McWilliams, a military installation. Do you suppose that's a coincidence?
Oh, of course not. Of course not. It's all tied in. The military-industrial complex and the security-industrial complex. And, ultimately, of course, if the NSA is going to be using this mass of data to make a list of good Americans versus bad Americans, at some point when things really start to fall apart, the military is going to want access to that list. So I'm sure they're probably already plugged into it by now.
Indeed, the cloud is alive and well in America. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much. The cloud itself is not actually doing all that well. People are getting off the cloud. They want their data at home on their own archive drives, hidden up in the towel closet or something. Because they know they cannot trust the cloud. They cannot trust these large computer corporations that have been working hand in glove with the NSA to violate our privacy, violate the Fourth Amendment. And again, it all comes down to the idea that the government is not treating the American people as a population of human beings worthy of respect and care, but is treating us like we're possessions, like we're a herd of livestock. And it's an attitude that we see habitually in the money junkies. Andrew Carnegie espoused the position that the ultra-rich were a completely separate species from ordinary human beings. And on the basis of that presumption, anything they wanted to do to ordinary humans was considered fair game because they weren't really humans. They were Untermenschen. They didn't have money, therefore we don't have to be concerned about what they can and cannot do to us. And that, of course, is a very un-American idea. It certainly clashes with the opening to the Declaration of Independence. This idea that we're going to have an elite nobility based on finance, as if it was ever otherwise, I might add. But it is. It's quite un-American. This is not what the United States is supposed to be. It's not what it was set up to be. And we've now reached this point where we have the government itself flagrantly violating the laws to do what they want to do, whether it's the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution and privacy, or violating the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act to send more of your money over to Israel, who doesn't really need it, they just want it. And it sends kind of a mixed message to our young people. I know Phyllis Schlafly was going on about this overreaction to young people in schools for trivial offenses. But what do you think these young people are thinking when they see the government's leadership openly defying the law and figuring a press conference and a public relations committee is going to fix it? What kind of a moral lesson are we setting for that next generation? That you can do whatever you want as long as you have the political connections to get away with it. That's not very healthy for society as a whole. This nation was set up on the principle that everybody, up to and including the President of the United States, has to obey the laws of the land and international treaty obligations as well. Now, interesting story over at the Internet Post. It's been announced that because there are so many problems involving the timeline of events regarding the Sandy Hook massacre, that they're going to come out with a new timeline. The government is basically saying, all right, yes, that timeline had problems. It is no longer operative. Forget you ever saw it. Winston Smith is busy erasing it away, and we're going to come up with a new timeline that reinforces the official story. And still and all, we don't see anybody talking about psychoactive medications. When you go back and you look at all these mass shootings that are being used to demonize guns and gun owners, and have you noticed this little double standard? If somebody carries out a mass bombing, they blame the bomber. But if there's a mass shooting, oh, it's the fault of the guns. And what they're not telling you is there is a very long and well-documented history of prescription psychoactive medications, in particular the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, the SSRIs, triggering unexplained mass violence and suicide in patients. There's a website called ssristories.com. You need to go and look at that. This is a major problem. But as we now understand, we live in a nation where the mistakes and errors of corporations are withheld from the public to protect profitability, whether it's the dangers of GMO to protect Monsanto, the dangers of fracking to protect the natural gas industry, the dangers of SSRIs to protect the pharmaceutical industries. That's where we are right now. We are a fascist nation in which government has abandoned the idea of arbiter between corporate desire and needs of the people, and it's firmly on the side of the corporations. Oh, you put out a product that's killing people? Don't worry, we'll hush it up. Because I've got stock in your company and I don't want my portfolio to decline in value, so we're going to make sure people don't talk about SSRIs and the link to mass shootings. We're not going to talk about how mercury-based preservatives in vaccine have been linked to autism. We're not going to talk about that French study that fed rats GMO corn and glyphosate and found the rats developing huge tumors after 4 months' time. We're not going to talk about that. We're just going to go on telling the American people everything is okay. Buy, spend more, and thou shalt be happy. That's the current business model here. Speaking of timelines, John Kerry's over there in the Middle East trying to get Israel and Palestine to engage in peace talks, and he's come up with his own timeline of 9 months down the road, by which time everybody will have forgotten that Kerry was out there trying to get peace talks going, and Kerry will duck the political fallout from its inevitable failure. Because for peace to happen, everybody has to agree. But it only takes one lunatic with a surplus of weapons to get a war going and keep it going. And that's where we are right now. Meanwhile, Barack Obama has sent Senators Graham and McCain to Egypt to press them for new elections. Say, please have new elections and keep on having elections until somebody we like gets the office. We'll be. America, welcome back to the show. And Fox News is now going on about another athlete steroid scandal in the Major Baseball League or whatever it is here. Oh, scandal, scandal. They're taking steroids, these athletes. They're taking performance enhancement drugs. But according to Jay Carney at the White House, of course, Benghazi and the IRS targeting of Americans, those are phony. Those are just distractions. Please look at the steroids, athletes on steroids. We're in full conditization mode here right now. Now, getting back over to Egypt, where Obama has dispatched a couple of senators to convince them to have immediate elections and to keep on having elections until somebody the United States likes actually wins. And we're seeing articles in other places like the World Tribune where the Obama administration is losing credibility in Cairo, which I guess makes it unanimous. And it's basically underscoring that America's foreign policy, especially in that part of the world, has crumbled. That the more the U.S. tries to throw its weight around, the less and less actual influence it's getting. This situation with Snowden in Russia is a classic example. By trying to play the bully, the White House created a political climate which made it impossible for Russia to send Edward Snowden back to the United States of America. And so now the White House is throwing a tantrum. We're going to cancel the planned summit between Obama and Putin, which frankly, after the drubbing Obama got when they met at the G20, he was probably looking for a reason to cancel this summit anyway. America's foreign policy is in serious, serious trouble. Even the nations the United States succeeded in invading and conquering are breaking away, like Afghanistan and Iraq. Because these newly installed governments are realizing that because these wars were sold to the American people with weapons of mass destruction and 9/11 and Al-Qaeda, that the United States government could not possibly sell to the American people a re-invasion of Iraq or a re-invasion of Afghanistan. And so those new governments are perfectly free to do whatever they feel they want to do in their own best interest, including thumbing their nose at the United States. Now, down in Syria, President Bashar al-Assad has been retaking major portions of Syria back from the hired mercenary army, which are now fighting themselves as much as they're fighting anybody else. And the gains the so-called insurgents, actually hired foreign mercenaries, paid for and armed covertly by the United States of America. Remember, it came out last week, the Syrian police who abandoned the government to join the so-called rebels were being paid by the United States of America. And now we have this situation where Assad has very wisely offered an amnesty program. If you will come back to the side of the government, all past sins are forgiven, and a lot of Syrians are taking advantage of that. They're leaving the rebel, hired mercenary army and going back to Assad. So the hired mercenaries have been pushed back from Damascus. They've taken back several towns near the border with Lebanon, and Assad is now expressing confidence that he is going to simply defeat and erase this hired mercenary army from within his borders, which is why you have people like John McCain out there saying, we, the United States, must directly militarily intervene. Oh, really? Why? Why? Does Syria have weapons of mass destruction? I mean, they're trying to scream they got chemical weapons. And by the way, Syria has now invited the United Nations inspection teams to come into the areas where chemical weapons were supposedly used and decide for themselves whether it was Assad, as the White House keeps screaming, or if it was in fact the hired mercenaries who were caught with these American-made chemical weapons to use on Syrian civilians to blame Assad, as pretty much the rest of the world now understands. By the way, for those of you living in Columbus, Ohio, during the week of August 1st through 17th, they're having another terror drill in Columbus, Ohio, simulating a nuclear terror attack. And that's going to keep people up at night, because we know that surrounding all of these various false flag attacks that we have seen, there's always a drill. Oh, it's just a drill. Pay no attention to all the preparations going on. And then the terror attack goes live, and by golly, everybody's in position to do what they need to do. We know, we have documented, we've confirmed. FEMA was in New York, near the World Trade Centers, the night before it actually happened. When the 7/7 bombings occurred in the London subway, it was in the middle of a terror drill, simulating a bombing attack on the subway, exact same time, exact same place. So, sleep well, people in Columbus here. Turning to the economy now, the Eurozone unemployment rate has now reached what is considered alarming levels, and that Europe's economic problems are going to continue. A big part of that, of course, is the austerity program, where governments are being encouraged to cut social services, cut public workers, cut police, cut fire, cut all these various government agencies to save money in order to send more money to the bankers. The problem with that is, in these depressed economies, there are no private sector jobs for these people to go to. So tax revenues go down. People go on the remaining social assistance programs more heavily. The economy is locking up. For an economy to be healthy, for an economic system to function as a system, money must be flowing freely at all levels and into all sectors of that economy to keep it going. When you have the money junkies setting things up to suck all of the money and all the wealth back up into their own pockets, and they leave nothing left behind, the economy can't function. Commerce can't function. And the system starts to lock up. We have a situation here in the United States of America where you've got whole strings of companies that are owed money, and they're all waiting for somebody else who owes them money to cut a check. And if that check gets a little too late, then the first company collapses. And then the people that business owed money to, they collapse because they're not getting paid. And this domino effect starts taking place, taking out whole strings of stores, businesses, shops, companies. You cannot have a healthy economy when all of the wealth is concentrated in this little tiny cap on the top of the pyramid. And the biggest single failing of our current political and economic system is everybody inside, everybody in the 1%, everybody on Wall Street in Washington, D.C. is figuring out, how can I take more money from the masses? Higher taxes, higher fees, privatization, whatever. And nobody inside that system is thinking, how do we make it possible for the American people to earn that money to give to us? How do we make it possible for them to trade their labor for the wealth necessary to pay all these increasing demands? Nobody's thinking about that. And that's why this economy is doomed. They're all completely obsessed with gaming the system and public relations to make it look like it's still working. But I'm sure in their heart of hearts they understand that this economy has been driven to the edge of a cliff by 100 years of private central banking issuing the public currencies alone at interest. The nation is shutting down. It's like tying a tourniquet around your neck so that all the blood stays in the brain. And for a while, the brain's going to feel happy. It's getting all the nutrients, getting all the oxygen, getting all the sugar. And then the rest of the body starts dying off. And the brain is saying, we don't need to worry about that. I'm the brain. I don't need the body. But of course, once the body actually dies, the brain will die too. And they're not thinking about that on Wall Street. They're thinking about that next big score. Remember that documentary Inside Job? Won the Academy Award for Best Documentary 2 years ago, and then promptly vanished from the American media. And they said they had scientists actually wire up Wall Street people to brain scans and discovered that when they make a big financial score, the part of their brain that lights up is the same one that lights up when they do cocaine. It's an addictive process. These are money junkies, and it's time for an intervention for their own good and the good of the nation. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And interesting little story coming out of, amazingly enough, Fox News, where the White House is starting to put together a behavior insights team to try and find psychological tools with which to nudge Americans back into obedience. In other words, they don't see you as human beings with inherent rights. They're basically treating you like laboratory rats in the college psych class or Pavlov's dogs. We just need to find the correct bell to ring to get you to drool over the American flag. And it's another reminder that this government does not see you as human beings with inherent rights. They see you as a herd of critters, livestock, to be manipulated, to be tricked, to be lied to be harvested for as much wealth, for as little upkeep as possible, and of course to encourage you to breed plenty and plenty of new future workers and soldiers. We're right into Orwell's 1984, and you know, the odd thing is Orwell wrote that book as a warning, not as an instruction manual. Now, everybody was very happy over the initial job numbers for the month of June this year, which showed a lot of new job creation. But as people began to dig into the actual numbers, they began to realize that that larger job number wasn't really meaningful, because we're seeing a trend because of Obamacare. Companies are letting full-time workers go and replacing them with 2 or 3 part-time workers in order to evade Obamacare. So the job numbers may be going up, but it doesn't actually mean Americans as a whole are working any longer or more productively or earning any more money. It's just another bookkeeping trick that they're using. And now, of course, everybody is getting ready for the July job numbers to come out. But apparently TrimTabs, which is a data firm that manages payrolls for companies across the United States, is saying that actually payroll growth was much slower than was expected. And so we may see amazing-looking job numbers come out for July, but Americans as a whole are not really being paid all that much more. Now, owing to budget cuts and sequestration, we're beginning to see a policy emerge from the federal government of shutting down government agencies that are putting out statistics that don't really look very good. If you have a statistic that looks good, the unemployment rate is down, job creation is up, your salaries in your job are secure. But if you're coming out with numbers that actually reveal how bad things are, your department's going to get shut down. The Bureau of Labor Statistics is being forced to eliminate the program collecting data on mass layoffs. Now, there was actually a law that was passed that said if you are a corporation planning a mass layoff, you had to give your workers an advance notice, and the notice was posted in this online database to say if you work for this company, there are major layoffs, significant percentage of the workforce coming. And those statistics were collected to show how many companies are having to stay solvent by savaging their own workforces. And apparently that program is going to go away because the numbers don't look good. Obama can't wave them around and say, see, the economy is doing better. Forget all about Benghazi and NSA and IRS and all that other stuff. That's just phony distractions here. We're going to massage the job numbers to make them look really, really good. And we know the real jobless rate in this country is close to 40% because of what are termed the 88 million invisible unemployed. And even Fox News reported on that. What they mean by invisible unemployed are people who've been out of work for so long, they've exhausted all possible unemployment benefits, and they're just simply not counted any longer in the jobless numbers. The unemployment rate is just the people who lost their jobs in the last couple of months, not the total jobless population. We know that less than half of Americans have a full-time job at this point. We've already gone past the Depression of the 1930s in terms of the hardship that has been visited on us by this out-of-control, money-junkie private central bank issuing the public currencies alone at interest. This is the new Great Depression, or we'll call it the Grand Depression, to try and spin it as being something positive. Mortgage applications have slumped to a 2-year low. So for all this talk about the housing recovery, it's not happening. Fewer and fewer people are applying for mortgages. Now, some cities have adopted a very interesting solution to the foreclosure fraud and foreclosure crisis. They're condemning properties seized by foreclosure under eminent domain. Then they turn around and hand them back to the families who were kicked out. Because we're not going to get any help from the federal government or the banks or Wall Street. They're looking out for themselves. They see themselves as in survival mode. We've got to protect our wealth and privilege and power. And those American people, well, they're just on their own. If Obama wanted to be honest with the American people, he'd get up there at the White House press room and say, greetings, my fellow Americans. You're on your own. Thank you and good night. That's the truth of what's going on here. Now, we're hearing a lot of talk about the national debt. And we know that the official U.S. Treasury national debt has been hovering at $16 trillion for 2 months now, just below the congressionally mandated debt ceiling. Did they stop borrowing, or are they simply refusing to report how far over that debt ceiling they've gone? Probably the latter. But according to a study by James D. Hamilton of the University of California in San Diego, if you look at all of the U.S. government's off-balance sheet liabilities, the actual U.S. national debt is $70 trillion. That's 70 trillion with a T. And they cannot pay it off. And neither can you. There are not enough living Americans to ever possibly pay that off. Because we are enslaved to a private central bank that issues all of the currency to business, to the people, to the government as a loan at interest, which guarantees the debt is larger than the available money supply with which to pay it. It's a trap. It's an intentional trap. And unless and until we have leadership with the moral courage of an Andrew Jackson or an Abraham Lincoln or a John F. Kennedy, there's only one way this is going to end, with a massive, massive collapse. Now, according to a story over at the Weekly Standard, Obama is out there already talking about higher taxes. We can solve everything if we just take more away from the American people and give it to Wall Street and the government here. And he's now calling for a top tax rate for corporations of 28%, but he wants to tax small businesses at 40%. Now that's insane. Small business is responsible for most new job creation. Most American small businesses are just hanging on as it is. If you raise their taxes like that, they're going to go out of business. You need to understand an economy is like a large pickup truck or the engine inside. And part of that energy from the engine is used to keep the engine itself going, overcome the friction of the pistons and the cylinders, overcome the friction and energy loss in the transmission and so forth. And you can put stuff in that load bed of the truck. That's the taxation. And let's say you're taking that truck up a hill, and you put more and more load in that truck bed. You're going to reach the point where there is so much energy being taken out of the engine just to carry that load that the engine doesn't have enough energy left to run itself. And it begins to stutter. And it's not a gradual slowdown to a stop. You reach a point where it simply stops working completely and suddenly, and that's what's going to happen with the U.S. economy as they keep on adding more and more rocks to the load bed of that truck, hitch on a trailer and put more load on that. We're going to reach a point where it simply will shudder to a stop, and it'll happen very, very quickly. Going to start grabbing some phone calls here. Robert in California. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, good morning, Michael. You know what? It's kind of sad that unemployment is like way out of whack. But if he helps in any way, I'm a truck driver, and my understanding is that it's a shortage of drivers, at least 35,000 to 40,000 drivers nationwide. So if anyone is interested in that, probably could be a way out, because this is pretty much a full time. You could do like a long haul or stuff.
Okay, but I guess that's good to know. I understand there's some very tight unions you have to get into for truck drivers. Actually, when I was a kid, I actually thought that would be cool because I love cross-country driving. We got to take a break for commercials. More phone calls when we come back. America, welcome back to the show here. We're going to go to the phones. Kathleen in Texas. Aloha, Kathleen. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Kathleen, are you there? Okay, I guess not. Alrighty, moving right along here. Very interesting story came out of 12160.info. Apparently, some of the former Israeli intelligence operatives who helped set up the NSA spying on you, the law-abiding American citizens, are now working for hedge fund companies on Wall Street. And that's going to wake up a lot of people who are in that investment community, because in addition to the NSA spying on their business secrets in their everyday life, now we have the potential for hedge fund managers to be spying on their own investors to glean information. It's completely out of control. And whereas the government can assume the mantle of justification for spying on the American people, although their justification is a complete tissue of lies, private corporations are not covered by that presumption of national security necessity. These are private companies, hedge funds, hiring these security experts to implement this kind of spying. And that, too, is not America. Okay, Kathleen in Texas is back. Aloha, Kathleen. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I thank you for that wonderful, uplifting story about the town that condemned the foreclosed homes and gave the property back to the people. That is just so beautiful. Now, if you could just tell us what the name of that town is. I mean, I would surely like to know. It's
Richmond, and Richmond, I think, in California, because the story I'm looking at is in the San Francisco Bay Area News.
Oh, how wonderful. Oh, that was just so great. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. And
well, let me tell you one other thing.
Yes.
When I was working, I hurt my back about 2 years ago, but when I was working, there were people, because obviously that's a beautiful idea from a good in the midst of all the misery. But wherever we go, you find people that, whatever work environment, you'll have people who are negative and positive, and I used to go around to the ones I knew who were wonderful. I thought of them as islands of kindness and mercy. and I would go up and flop on their beach, after swimming with all the sharks, and then so we started the Do Not Faint Club. And so when I'd flop on the beach, it's do not faint, do not be weary in well-doing, for in due season you shall reap if you faint not. And so that's from the Old Testament. I forget what book, but anyway. So no matter where we go, we're going to have. But that was such a beautiful story because to encourage us and to know that God will inspire us with great ideas because He stamped us with His goodness.
Okay, well, let me get back to something else here, Kathleen. Again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier in the show. For an economic system to be working as a system, the money and wealth has to be flowing at all levels of society. And we've got a government and a financial clique that are just totally obsessed with how do we take more money out of the people, and nobody in that federal government who's supposed to be looking out for the welfare of the nation as a whole is thinking, how do we create a situation in which America's workers can transform their work into wealth in order to feed the greed of Wall Street? And again, going back to the 1980s, we saw this rush to send all manufacturing overseas, and they said, oh, we'll just have a service economy. But there's a funny thing about the service economy. People need manufactured goods. They have to have a car to go to work. They have to have stoves to cook their foods on. They have to have refrigerators to store their food on. But the services are not mandatory. They don't need to have somebody else do their laundry. They don't need to have somebody else listen to their whining and complaining and saying, oh, yes, you're right, and feeling justified what's going on. People learn to do without services very, very quickly. And so that whole service economy was doomed to collapse anyway. And we just have this corporate culture and a government that absolutely is oblivious to the idea that Americans have to have a way to generate that wealth, to transform their labor into wealth before it can be harvested off. And unfortunately, it took about 30 years to undermine and destroy much of our manufacturing. It's not going to come back overnight, even if they escalate this into a complete global nuclear world war, because all those factories sitting out there in America's heartland, you can't just walk in, turn on the lights, and start manufacturing. Those buildings are empty. The machinery's been stripped off and scrapped or sold to other countries. They're basically empty buildings. And it's going to take just as long to rebuild America's manufacturing might as it took to throw it away. What we need here, when we talk about the blueprint for the new America, is a government that understands labor precedes capital. And you will not have a healthy economy unless working people are able to transform their labor into revenue by creating products for sale, export, and we've had all these horrible confluences. American products are so poorly made. Those remaining American products are so poorly made, nobody wants to buy them. America's weapons are overpriced and underperforming, and nobody wants our agriculture because of genetically modified mistakes. And
well, just remember that with the creativity that we all have, think of the guy in Germany that invented Velcro. He was pulling those burrs out of his socks, and then think of the guy that invented the pet rock. Now, granted, the pet rock didn't stay around long enough, but
that was a fad, and it was a joke, and people got a chuckle out of it. I thought the guy who invented
a couple million.
I think the guy who invented Velcro was in Norway, not Germany, if I remember correctly. Anyway, Kathleen, we're going to let you go. We're coming up here on the top of the hour, and we're coming up on the time when we're going to have our third-hour guest talking about keeping an eye on the government to make sure they're actually following the letter of the law. We're going to take one more phone call. Jason in Ohio. Aloha. Jason, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Jason, are you there? There you are. You're on the air.
Okay. Hey, Mike, I wanted to tie together some of your points you were making earlier about unemployment and mortgage applications being down. I don't know if you're familiar with Fifth Third Bank, regional bank out of Cincinnati. They have informed their mortgage processors in both the Dayton and Columbus branches that they will all be laid off as of August 31st this year.
Wow, that's a red warning flag that we're going into another collapse of the housing market.
Yep, as soon as they bumped that interest rate up 1%, I guess it just crippled everything.
And here we have Obama talking about raising corporate tax rates to 28% and small business tax rates to 40%. You know, the American people are in water, struggling to stay afloat. They're just keeping their head above water, and Obama wants to throw a fire hose down their mouth and turn it on full blast. There's good management for you.
I'm pretty sure the small business hike is just to eliminate the small businesses.
Could very well be, but they're also going to eliminate all those small business jobs, and there's something that American businesses seem to have forgotten. Your employees are your customers. And we have all these businesses saying we're saving money and increasing profitability by letting all these workers go, and then they wonder why all of a sudden people aren't coming through their front door to buy products and services anymore. And that's where the system really began to break down. And a few years ago when Claire and I were involved in the local Buy Hawaii program, that was the concept behind one of the ads we created. Collectively, your employees are your customers. And if everybody starts saying, I'm going to fire my workers and do the manufacturing overseas, then they're standing around wondering why nobody's coming through the front door to buy their products anymore, and they're scratching their head saying, what the heck happened?
Yeah, I agree pretty much.
Yep. Okay?
All right, thank you.
All right, thanks an awful lot. An economy is not just the rich getting richer. An economy means making sure that everybody has enough money to conduct their business and commerce. And that's where the federal government has absolutely failed the American people. We'll be right back after news and station identification. Welcome back to the third hour of our show. And joining us for the top of the hour here is Adele Weiss from WeissParis.com. He's a brand new advertiser here at Republic Broadcasting, helping to support us to get the word out to the American people about what's going on. And Adele, basically, I linked your page to my page, and I was taking a look at what you're talking about. It seems to basically be tapping into the realization by the American people that we cannot trust the government or the corporations to comply with the law, and that we, the people, have to start double checking and making sure that the law is being followed with regards to certain aspects of our lives. Would you like to elucidate to our listeners, please?
Thank you, Mike. I fully agree with your comment. You're basically, I think, alluding in part to the fact that education is a very primary function and responsibility of every American. So with that, I think you're definitely on the right track.
So tell us a little bit about what your organization actually does, what it offers to people in the United States.
All right. We basically deal with American nationals. And American nationals, to keep it real simple, are those who are born in one of the 50 states of the Union, or they may be born to parents who at least one of them are born in one of the 50 states of the Union. Thus, they may have individually been born in a foreign country, but because of their heritage of their parents, they're considered American national. And then the other group would be those who are naturalized. So I'm using the term American nationals to segregate away from the term that is used statutorily by, for example, the Internal Revenue Code, using the term U.S. citizen. Those are statutory creations of Congress, or indicating those who were born in one of the in the District of Columbia or one of the U.S. territories. So when you look at that audience that we're trying to attract information and services to, we're directing the idea of the education primarily, providing information about 4 key areas. The first one would be the revocation of the election. Most Americans are not aware that when they made their first Form 1040 federal income tax return, they made an election. They attached one type of a tax class 5 statement, such as a W-2, 1099, maybe a 1098, to that return, and they made the election by doing that. And that election...
Can I stop you here, because you're using the term election, and I think we're going into fine detail without having actually given our listeners an overview of what you're really talking about. I'd like to read a quote from your website that I think will get into the issue that you're talking about. Here is what the Supreme Court ruled in Bevins versus United States 16 U.S. 336 in 1818, which clearly illustrates the fact that there are 2 separate and distinct jurisdictions within the United States of America. In the United States of America, there are two separated and distinct jurisdictions, such being the jurisdiction of the states within their own state boundaries, and the other being federal jurisdiction, which is limited to the District of Columbia, the U.S. territories, and federal enclaves within the states under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 17. So if I understand you correctly, what you're talking about is the fact that the American people living in the 50 states may not be as subject to federal jurisdiction as the federal government likes to pretend. Am I correct?
That's right. In fact, if you look at the acts of Congress, they must be published in the Federal Register before they become applicable to the American public. Now, if they are not published in the Federal Register, that means they do not apply to the 50 states of the Union. And I can tell you personally, I wrote Michael L. White. He's a federal attorney, Office of the Federal Register. I asked him for the volume, date, and page number of the publication of the Patriot Act, for example, in the Federal Register. And he sent me a copy of the Patriot Act. He never responded. He basically gave me his answer sub silentio by saying it really isn't published there. So when you understand that jurisdiction is a limiter against the government, the people have a lot of freedom. But if people are not aware and educated to understand the distinction of the jurisdictions, they will be able to fall prey to the propaganda, if you will, because the government is very adept at using the words, because most of them are attorneys. They're very specialized in their education, and they use words of art that have similar expressions, such as citizen or United States, and it creates confusion because the everyday American understands what that means to them, but they don't know in detail what it means to those that work for and represent the national government. Now, it's very, very critical.
Now, we understand that when the United States was created, when the Constitution was written, the power and authority over everyday Americans was reserved to the states, and the federal government was severely limited. Its role was limited to arbitration between the states and defense of the whole nation in time of war. But we certainly today, as we come to be aware that the federal government absolutely does not see any reason to abide by the constitutional limits anymore, their attitude is clearly, hey, we can do what we want, everywhere we want, to anybody we want at any time. But it may not be the letter of the law. I have heard before this idea that the federal government's jurisdiction over the 50 states is actually more severely limited than the federal government likes to portray it as. And certainly in this age where Americans are just incensed over NSA spying, IRS targeting of political dissidents, the accumulated lies that led us to war, I think more and more Americans are already seeing the federal government as completely illegitimate to begin with. And now we have this issue that the federal government's legal jurisdiction does not actually extend over the 50 states themselves. It's all bluff and bluster.
Most of the time, the laws that are created by Congress, and if they were able to put the actual jurisdiction to which each of the laws applied on every bill, every act created by Congress, you would know very clearly that hardly any of them ever apply to the 50 states of the Union. They apply only within the District of Columbia in U.S. territories for the most part. So you're right on target with this.
Why do we not see more state governments stand up and invoke this principle to refuse some of these unfunded mandates and incursions into their authority? I mean, I understand that most people in state government view their jobs as on-the-job training for the big move to Washington, D.C., and they're naturally predisposed to be sympathetic to that strong central federal government. But in a lot of cases where states, well, like Arizona, good example over the immigration argument there, where the Arizona passed an immigration law and the federal government said, no, you can't do it. At that point, Arizona should have stood up and said, federal government, your jurisdiction is limited to federal territory in the District of Columbia, and you don't actually have that much to say about how the individual states conduct their business.
Money and power.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two culprits that the American people are having to fight every day. The state governments, like you said, a lot of them are using it as the training ground for a federal position at some point. And then once they complete that journey, they migrate back, so they bring with that attitude from the federal experience back to the states, and they keep reinforcing this vicious cycle that you're describing. And so the states are basically acquiescing. And when the states do that and the people are silent, then they get away with an awful lot.
Well, again, I don't think people are going to be silent much longer because certainly the federal government has lost the illusion that what they are doing is the letter of the law. They openly violate their own laws left and right. They're violating the Constitution. And so it should come as no surprise that they're violating this separation of jurisdictions in order to impose their will on the 50 states and the American people.
If you look at what has transpired, let's just take the income tax again as a foundational example. If you make this election that I alluded to, which basically means you filed your first Form 1040 or some type of variant of return, you are electing, volunteering, if you will, is what they call it. A voluntary election, you're saying, treat me as if I were a U.S. resident alien. Mm-hmm. And I have the regulations I can cite and confuse everybody, but I'll give you that if you want it. But the main thing is that that's what they're doing. So if Americans basically transfer their identity and their status to be one who is subservient to the government, then who's left?
Okay, we got to take a break. We got to take a break. We'll be back in 3 minutes with Adele Weiss. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Adele Weiss from WeissParis.com. We're talking about the actual legal limits to the jurisdiction of the federal government, about how you are being tricked into what is effectively a contract saying that you surrender your state sovereignty, citizenship, and you sign into the federal system, which supposedly makes you liable for federal income tax. Of course, we know that all along this has all been misrepresented to us, going all the way back to the fact that the 16th Amendment itself was not actually ratified. And so, it's interesting to talk about the rules, but we have to recognize the government doesn't believe in following the rules. The rules are just for you. Anyway, Adele, you were going to start on another topic. You were elaborating on this whole idea of what you call an election, which I think basically is construed as you voluntarily decide to enslave yourself to the federal government.
Right, and basically people look at what everybody refers to as the intent of the 16th Amendment, and they don't think of it as the legal intent. They talk about the 16th Amendment, and that document was created by President Taft in 1909, and he basically admitted that the federal government has no authority or power because of a Supreme Court decision that basically said you don't have the authority, you can't levy the tax upon the American people. And they turned around and actually accomplished that through the 16th Amendment. But what they did in the statement, which people don't really lock into, and this relates to jurisdiction, is that they accomplished the 16th Amendment without regard to the apportionment rule. Now, this gets a little boring for some people, but if you think about the apportionment as a direct tax, it's only on the state legislatures and not on the people. The government, the federal government, has no authority to levy a tax directly on any American. So they can only either use direct or indirect taxes. And ATF is an example of indirect taxes, such as alcohol, tobacco, firearms, cotton production, and such. Mm-hmm. All of those are choices that people make to buy or consume those products or not. And that tax is levied on them indirectly if they choose to consume those products. Now, direct tax is a one-time tax. The government rarely, if ever, uses it. In fact, I don't know of one example that comes to my mind that they've used it, because once they collect the funds for it, it's over. So in the process of creating the 16th Amendment, they identified the proper jurisdiction for the 16th Amendment to actually apply, and it's only D.C., the District of Columbia. It is not for the 50 states of the Union. So they have to somehow draw people into their jurisdiction, and they do this under 6013G of the Internal Revenue Code, which they give you the opportunity to make an election, basically file a return, through their propaganda efforts to encourage you to do so. And next thing you know, you're identified as one who is treated like a U.S. resident alien, somebody from another country like Brazil, China, India, someplace. And you're treated as a taxpayer as a result of that.
Well, that is that's a very interesting revelation, and it seems like the more we look and the more we dig, we're finding more and more of these issues where basically they're just sort of fudging their way into our wallets. even setting aside the issue of whether the 16th Amendment was actually ratified or not, the United States Supreme Court in Stanton versus Baltic Mining ruled that the 16th Amendment did not actually create any new tax authority for the U.S. government. So, again, it's all bluff and bluster. You must do this. And, basically the 16th Amendment and the Federal Reserve Act came in the same year in order to collateralize government borrowing from that private central bank with the future slave labor of the American people. And that's the reality. For all this talk about land of the free and the home of the brave, the American people have been sold as slaves to that private central bank for 100 years now.
You are correct. And, when you think about the 13th Amendment, which outlaws slavery and involuntary indentured servitude in the 50 states of the Union, not in the District of Columbia, however, but in the 50 states of the Union, because in D.C., the Constitution is void. It has no full force effect of the law. People don't realize that the jurisdiction for the application of the Constitution, which you and I are addressing today, only applies within the constitutional republic. It has no full force and effect of law in D.C., and that's why George Bush years ago, as president, said the Constitution is a blankety-blank piece of paper. Well, it's a piece of artwork in D.C.
I think there may have been some other issues now. Of course, the United States Supreme Court did uphold the Second Amendment in Washington, D.C. with regard to gun rights here. We're coming down to the bottom of the segment, and before I let you go, I want to ask a question. Who are the people in the United States? What circumstances are they in where they would find you and your website to be of use right now?
If they want to exit the U.S. tax club legally and lawfully, the federal government has allowed people to do that. We have the documentation, the statutes and regulations to support every bit of it. We operate based totally on enacted federal tax law so that people can have the assurance that the U.S. Congress has provided this for their benefit. And we show them how to accomplish this, and we provide the documentation to get the results.
Okay, and people can come over to weissparis.com and they can take a look at your information and your documentation. We still have about another 4 minutes to go here. Is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Well, we do have the area for people that are receiving notice of deficiencies when they have not filed a return. We have a method of dealing with the United States Tax Court in which they can receive a court order of dismissal for lack of jurisdiction. And we give a 100% money-back guarantee on that because we win 100% of the time.
Well, it sounds really good, almost, too good. And my next question would be, given that we have a federal government that absolutely ignores the law, what is the possibility they're simply going to come in and say, what you're doing is wrong, it's illegal, we're going to find some reason to prosecute you? I mean, you have to be concerned right now after seeing what happens to people like Bernard von Nothaus for his Liberty Dollar. Are you worried that the government might want to sort of close off what they would see as a loophole?
Not that I'm aware that they can ever do that, because basically they have written the laws, they've written the statutes, they've written the regulations, and we're abiding by each and every one of them. Now, if they change it, and if the Constitution is dead, then that changes the nature of the marketplace, if you will. But without that occurring, everything we're doing is based directly on the law, and they can't argue with themselves.
All right, real quick, we've got a phone call that wants to ask you a question. Lauren in Ohio. Aloha, Lauren. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, well, it wasn't really a question, but I can turn it into one. I want to know, as far as your understanding, God made the men made a club, the club made rules, codes, regulations, and statutes to control the maids and the butlers of the club. So those rules of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Bill of Rights is for us, the free men, the free kings, but the Constitution is to limit them. What I'm wondering is, with regard to, how do you perceive the fact that since God made us, and the 9th Amendment says the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people, they're acknowledging that we're free men. And also, they couldn't get away with this if we didn't consent to it. The 13th Amendment leaves room for voluntary servitude. When you're filling out this paperwork and being conned into contract, and it's not really a contract because fraud negates consent, and they've conned you into this, you've never read the whole details of the contract. So there's any number of... Anyway, the basic thing is, I'm wondering what you how do you feel with regard to the fact that God made the men? And I know, as far as for atheists, they're not, into that and all. But the whole point is, no man has the right to rule another man. Do you ever just get that simple about it?
Yes, we try to keep it very pragmatic, very simple, and by emails. With time running out, contact us by an email, and we'll be happy to address this for you.
Okay, that's
okay. And repeat your email one more time.
You can go to the website is weissparis.com. It's linked to the front page of What Really Happened. They have a banner ad at RBN. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. America, welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Malcolm in Texas. Aloha, Malcolm. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. I just came back from vacation. I went to Capitan, New Mexico, and Lincoln County, New Mexico. And I noticed I went to Smokey the Bear National Park, and they had a little part below the sign. It said part of the Department of Natural Resources and Energy. And when I asked somebody about this, who was at breakfast, he was one of these more he was a minister of some local church and really angry with what's going on with the government. He said that it's being inventoried due to the national debt, and apparently he was saying you will see the same thing with the Grand Canyon. You'll see a little UN logo with Department of Natural Resources and Energy and with Yosemite Park. And the only person I know of who's addressing this is that, I guess you could say that Yosemite Sam wannabe, who has that real popular broadcast show here in Austin, Texas, on that GCN
the
network.
other network.
And the thing is nobody's. I mean, they are inventorying our national parks for minerals, and it's like Chapter 11 almost. They're inventorying. Because we're up to our eyeballs in debt, this is what we're going to start to inventory to give away. And I think people need to start to address this. And
okay, now let me interrupt here. Take a Valium, calm down here. This is actually not new, because back again when Richard Nixon ended gold convertibility under the Bretton Woods Agreement, all of a sudden other countries didn't want to loan the United States any more money, because now they were aware the United States Treasury did not have enough gold to collateralize its outstanding debt. So Richard Nixon hit on the plan of using America's public property, the national parks, wilderness areas, as collateral for future government borrowing. And so Nixon created the Environmental Protection Agency to start grabbing and walling off all of this land under the guise of saving it for future generations and protecting Mother Earth. But in fact, these lands and their mineral resources were pledged as collateral on growing government debt. And they broke it up into all these little tiny programs to conceal the scale of the theft. Heritage rivers, wilderness zones, roadless areas, wetlands, all these different little programs, each grabbing a little bit amount of public land, and in some cases private land, and then walling it away. For example, Bill Clinton declared the Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument, which immediately meant the state of Utah could no longer harvest the coal that is underneath that land, which was what was funding their public school district. And that coal is now unusable by the American people because it is now the collateral against outstanding U.S. government debt. And so what they're doing at these national parks is more of the same thing, but it's been going on since the Nixon administration. But Americans are waking up and realize their birthright, their national lands have been misappropriated and usurped to prop up U.S. federal government debt. Now, we need to remember there is a principle in international law called odious debt, where when a country goes bust, the people are liable for debts incurred by their previous government that served the American people, roads, schools, hospitals, and so forth. Under the principle of odious debt, debt that was incurred to fight wars of conquest, to engage in political repression, to hand lots and lots of free money to other governments is not considered the legitimate debt of the taxpayers and can be simply ignored. So we, the American people, when the big kaboinga happens, which we all know is coming, we have to be ready to stand up united and say, no, you don't get to come in and take over the Grand Canyon or Sequoia National Park or any of these other national parks, because the debt that was these lands were collateral on is odious debt. We reject it. And the money junkies already have lawyers trying to figure out some way they can undermine or overturn that principle of odious debt, because other countries that have gone through changes of government have invoked that to say the people of the nation are not responsible for debts incurred without their permission and not for the benefit of the nation. And we're certainly seeing a lot of that starting to be talked about over in Greece, where at least half of the debt they're dealing with came out of that underhanded deal between Goldman Sachs and Papandreou to conceal the debt problem behind some currency swaps, which wound up doubling the debt, making Goldman Sachs a ton of money, and plunged Greece into the mess that it's in right now. And all of this idea of collateral and you, the people, have to pay the debts of bad government and bad business, it only works if you believe it. It's a belief-based system. None of this is science. None of this is based in the laws of physics. It is belief. And it's there. It's a system set up to rule you with your belief, whether it's rule by divine right, rule by chattel ownership of your person, meaning slavery, or rule by the artificially created illusion of indebtedness. And when you stop believing, you can just tell these money junkies, hey, you set up this game, you set up the rules, we had nothing to do with it, just make up some more imaginary money to satisfy your debt and go away and leave us alone.
Well, I believe that these money addicts need to move to the London financial district like the Iceland money addicts did and scream terrorism, terrorism, terrorism and run in circles until they drop. Because, I mean, I just think I was appalled when I was explaining this. I mean, I've heard that pompous GCN idiot on out of here, Austin, talk about that, and I just didn't think much about it. And then until I talked with someone in New Mexico about it, and I didn't realize that was widespread. And yeah, I think you talked about Bill Clinton doing the coal thing with Utah, but I just think this needs to be talked about more. I mean, these are beautiful parks.
Well, they're beautiful parks. They're mineral riches that should be used to support American industry, and bit by bit, our nation is being sold out from under us, and we are being converted into tenants on the lands our ancestors actually owned outright. Our country is being stolen out from under us slowly, while the corporate media says, look over here at this guy who tortured these girls. And
or these athletes on steroids.
Our athletes on steroids and this other nonsensical stuff. But yes, absolutely. This has been going on since the Nixon administration. They cloak it in the aura of environmental protection, but it's all about grabbing these pristine lands with natural resources and locking them away from the American people in order to pledge them as collateral on out-of-control government borrowing. And when it all falls apart, we, the American people, have to be ready to stand up and say, look, we never agreed to that. The government did not have a legal right to take our public lands, the property of the people, and treat it as if it was their own asset, because it wasn't. Okay? The government does not own this nation. We, the people, do. The government owns the military bases, and if they want to pledge those as collateral, go ahead. The government owns Washington, D.C., and if they want to sell that off in a garage sale to pay their debts, that's fine too. But they don't own resources like the Grand Canyon, the Great American West, Sequoia, all the national parks. That is the property of the people, and the American people never signed an agreement to allow their heritage to be pledged as collateral for out-of-control government borrowing.
Couldn't agree with you more, Mike. Keep up the good work. I'm going to let you go.
All right, thanks a lot. We're going to switch over here to Andrea in Oklahoma. Aloha, Andrea. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes. Basically, there was this fellow called Clint Richardson, and I sent you an email about the show. He was on Spangola, and he was saying that the way Detroit has done their books, they have like $9 billion hidden away, and they're claiming they have so many million in debt, but the way they're doing the books, this money that they could pay all the debt off is hidden, and they're wanting to destroy.
Can I interrupt here a little bit? I think you're talking about this concept of the comprehensive annual financial reports. And what you need to understand about that particular set of numbers is those numbers are based on non-convertible assets that cannot be liquidated in order to fund the cash requirements of the city. And so Detroit is certainly asset rich, but cash poor, and that's really what a bankruptcy is all about. So this whole CAFR thing, it's a pointless distraction because those very large numbers are based on assets that do technically belong to the people and cannot be liquidated or sold off to meet the city's immediate cash needs, because it's like selling your home to make your house payment is what it comes down to, and it really doesn't work. We just need to stay on focus. We have a financial system that leeches wealth from the American people, a government that works hand in hand with them to do that, has borrowed itself up to, according to this guy in San Diego, $40 trillion worth of debt that it can't possibly pay off, and their solution is, we'll squeeze it out of the people. And there's nothing left to be squeezed out of us. It isn't here. That money, that trillions of dollars of debt, never existed to begin with. It is a bookkeeping entry only to keep us a slave. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back with the last segment of our show today after these words from our sponsor. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And over at Newsmax.com, very interesting article. Karl Rove is out there saying that if there's a government shutdown, the Republicans will get the blame for it. It's an iron law. The GOP will get the blame for any government such shutdown. And, of course, it's not an iron law. And I'm not going to blame the Republicans for a government shutdown. I blame all of them. All of Washington, D.C., and all of Wall Street is why we are in this mess. And they know a crash is coming, and they're already out there pointing fingers. Oh, we had nothing to do with it. It's those people over there. It's politics as usual in Washington, D.C. The old Potomac two-step. Taking credit for things they don't do and dodging the blame for everything else. And even at this late stage, when it is obvious we are heading into a major crash, these career politicians can't stop being career politicians. Speaking of Wall Street, we already know what a complete unmitigated disaster the mortgage-backed securities were back in 2008. How much of it was fraudulent. But nobody on Wall Street was arrested. Nobody went to prison. Nobody got investigated because we have to protect the trustworthiness and reputation of America's banking cartels. Everyone's talking about, where will Edward Snowden escape the reach of U.S. law? He should move to Wall Street. He'll be perfectly safe there. So we're looking at this story over at Investment Watch blog on how, not being satisfied with having trashed the economy with mortgage-backed securities and now student loan-backed securities, auto contract-backed securities, now they've come out with yet another product, rental-backed securities, where you will give the bundlers of these rental agreements a huge sum of money, and in exchange for which you will get the rentals from these rental properties for some time to come. This is a bond backed by home rental payments. And it's another bubble. They're going to bubble it up and just say, these are the hot thing, everybody's making money, and it'll turn out to be another Ponzi scheme, because as the economy continues to decline, following hammer blow after hammer blow of bursted bubbles, rentals are going to default. People are going to move out of the expensive rentals into the cheaper rentals if they can find them. I got an email from somebody I've known for a lot of years, has had to leave his rental home of the last 12 years. He's moving into a house trailer on the back lot of somebody way out in the boonies. This is another get-rich-quick Wall Street scheme that is going to make the inside players very, very rich and dump the losses on anybody else who gets suckered into this thing. Another story out of Larshal.com. Apparently, the Bank of England is being pressed to explain some very large discrepancies in what are called the custodial gold reports. In other words, the Bank of England, like the Bank of France and the Federal Reserve, offer gold storage facilities and services to governments and banks around the world. And we already know that when Germany asked for their gold bullion back from the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve, the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve shuffled their feet around and said, it's going to take a couple of years to get your gold back to you. Then they invaded Mali, which happens to be Africa's third largest gold producer. So now the Bank of England has been exposed as having 1,200-ton discrepancy between what they're claiming on their paperwork and what actually seems to be there in the gold vaults. And we know that it's a growing scandal that these gold bullion banks will take the gold that is supposed to be stored there and they'll turn around and rehypothecate it, which is a fancy word for taking other people's gold and leasing it out the back door to other bullion dealers, to coin dealers, to jewelry makers. And figure, when somebody wants his gold bars back, we've got enough gold bars on hand to do that, but they can't return everybody's gold, and now people are starting to ask for their gold back because of what happened with Germany. And so the Bank of England has a 1,200-ton discrepancy between how much gold is supposed to be there, deposited by other banks, other countries, and how much seems to actually be there. And a lot of this gold has been leased out from these banks. Other people's gold is being leased out to gold futures traders to cover all of these paper contracts they have been flooding the market with to try and keep gold and silver prices down, to discourage people from leaving the stock market or pulling their savings out of the banks in order to go into the more reliable, dependable metals. And now they can't get it back. When they tried to crush down gold prices, they were hoping to scare people into rushing down to their gold scavenge dealers and selling their jewelry, selling their bars and coins. Oh, please take away this gold medal. I'm scared I'm going to lose a fortune here. And it didn't work because people weren't thinking about how much gold had dropped in the last 24 hours. They were remembering how much it had climbed since they bought in. In fact, the hammering down of gold prices through fraud, through overselling these paper contracts that they can't deliver on, actually triggered a buying frenzy around the world. And so now these bullion banks have a major, major problem because sooner or later there's going to be somebody who's got supposedly gold on deposit at the bullion banks or the brokerages, the vaulting services, who are not going to agree to settle for the cash value of their gold plus an uplift. And they're going to sue and say, where is my gold? And that will trigger the gold run on these bullion banks. And at that point, if the U.S. federal government has succeeded in taking away your guns, they're going to come after your gold to save the banks because they did it before in 1933. Because under this government's mindset, banks are far more important than human beings. These buildings of brick and mortar and marble and steel and glass are considered far more important than human beings, you the American people. You're just out there to do the work and breed soldiers and breed future workers and pay taxes and when necessary turn over your gold and silver and your valuables because this government has to protect the banks. It's open season on the American people, and they know, you know, that's why the NSA is out there spying on you, the law-abiding American citizen. They're trying to find out all your secrets. They're trying to find out who actually has gold or silver. Because if you've been buying it in small, tiny amounts, there's no paper record. If you're buying it in big, huge blocks, yeah, I'm afraid there's a paper trail. And that's not good enough. They want to find out who's got gold. They're looking in the Facebook page to see if you're posting photos of your gold coins. This is not about crime. It's not about terror. It's about finding where to send the jackboots to kick down the door and grab the wealth and weapons of the American people. And you should be angry. You should be furious. And how you channel that anger and rage is to get out there in public and talk about what's going on with your friends and neighbors and coworkers when you have the courage to speak out and say, this government is not legitimate any longer and I owe them no allegiance whatsoever. You will give others around you the courage to speak out about everything that's going wrong. And we will hasten the day where this entire system comes crashing down. And I know that's not a pleasant prospect, but better the Federal Reserve and federal government come crashing down than we allow them the time and opportunity to escalate this world war into a truly global nuclear conflict. Because the United States is going to lose, is already losing this third world war. And we have ample reason to pull the plug on it and say no more. You, the government of the United States of America, will go back to obeying the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and you will make the American people and the American nation your top priority. And any of you in the government who think Israel is important, kindly move there and run for the Knesset. Because America needs leaders who will put America first, second, and third in these trying times. Anyway. All right, there's the music. It's time for me to get on out of here, get something useful done with the afternoon. We will be back tomorrow, Friday, with the lovely Lady Claire in our third hour. Until then, stay safe, stay skeptical, stay angry, stay informed, make good choices. The time for polite restraint is over. You have a right and a duty to stand up and say, this government has lost all legitimacy. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.